Hello, 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 and welcome to the Madison channel. My name is Madison, and today we have part 2 of the deadliest cult that you've never heard of. But before we get into it, I want you guys to like this video, subscribe, comment, interact with it. If you're new here, hit that notification bell so you're notified anytime I post a new video, and subscribe to the channel, y'all. It's not going to hurt you. On top of that, to the returning people, hello, love you, welcome back. I'm so happy you are here. Comment on the video, like the video, interact with it. It does better in the algorithm, as well as watch my ads, y'all. Your girl is newly monetized. Watch a girl's ad so I can continue bringing research, scripted, amazing content like this one. That being said, we have a couple things that are, housekeeping things that I just want to get out of the way first and foremost. Firstly, and first mostly, I'm so happy that over the past week, I've gained about 1,000 subs, a little over 1,000 subs. So I just want to say hello to all the new subbies. There's a ton of content on my channel, true crime content, stories, all sorts of stuff. So I hope you guys start digging deeper in my content. And if you do, comment on the video and let me know, because I love the interaction. I love to interact with you guys in the comment section. So do that. I'd love that. Secondly, I wanted to say that, I did a 3-part series interview with the half brother of the girl from the Girl in the Picture documentary, the one that the whole documentary is about. And, that was a smashing success, I'd say. I'm really proud of those videos. Those were my first interviews. So if you've seen the Girl in the Picture doc and you want to know more about the story, from the family perspective, I have a 3-part interview that is, some of my most recent content. On top of that, though, the guy that I interviewed, Jonathan Brandenburg, has been falling on some difficult times. That's why in the past couple videos, I have in the pinned comments his Venmo, because he just needs a little help, y'all. We all need a little help sometimes, and I'm just trying to compensate him because he provided us with lots of information and insight in his interview, and I think it's fair to compensate him for that. So his Venmo will be in the pinned comment section again, and if you feel generous, send him a little cash. Like I said before, he got a job, which was a good thing, but he got struck by a car on the job, which is a terrible thing, and has been out of work for a while. So highly, 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 highly recommend you hitting him up and sending him a little cash. Just if you enjoyed what he said and all of that. No pressure, but you know what I mean. What else? Yeah, I think that's it, y'all. So we're going to be wrapping up part 2 of the movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments cult story. And this is where ish gets crazy, gets bonkers, gets cuckoo. This is where things start to go left. Part 1, we were kind of talking about the rise and the creation of this. Now we're talking about the downfall. So let's get into a quick recap. Let's do it. I just want to quickly shout out my sister in this absolutely gorgeous dream journal. It is a 12-week guided dream journal that has amazing prompts. It is absolutely super comprehensive to use and super high quality. Highly, highly recommend it. If you're interested in this, hit my Amazon storefront link in the bio so you can purchase it and try it out. Hope you love it. So we're going to just quickly recap the main players, and then we're going to get into like a where are they now type thing. So as I said, in part 1, we were talking about the context for which this church was formed and who the big players are. We have Cordonia, who is aka the programmer. We have Big Joseph, aka Joseph K., who is the bishop. We have Scholastica, her husband, and little Joseph, their son, who are the apostles. And then we have Dominic, aka the vicar general. And we are going to quickly go through what their whole deal was, so that everyone can be on the same page to start. We can refresh. So Cordonia is a person that basically is the person the marionette puppet master of this whole situation. She's the one that came up with the idea for the church. She is the one that has had the Marian apparitions. She is the one behind it all. She is the one pulling the strings of everybody. She found everybody. She collected everybody in order to build up the foundation of this church to make it seem legitimate. And at this point, everything is her idea, even if everyone thinks it's their own idea. So that's why she's called the programmer. Big Joseph, aka Joseph K., the bishop, was the first convert to Cardonia's, the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult. He is a wealthy man, was a wealthy landowning man from a wealthy landowning family in Uganda. He is a man with a bruised ego, which is very dangerous. And Cardonia spotted that. He had lots of liquid cash, lots of land for her to use to build up her church. So he was the first convert, him and his family. Then we have Scholastica. And she was a very prominent person in the Catholic Church in terms of knowing people and networking. People knew her. She's very credible. So she's an apostle to the church. And her family were the third wave of, converts. And so it's Scholastica, her husband, who basically plays like, a little bit of a background role in this whole situation, but is part of it. He's part of the ruling class of this cult. And then they have little Joseph, who is also an apostle, who is Scholastica and her husband's son. And yeah, they all kind of converted. They're all people. Joseph was trying in the school to become a clergyman in the official real Catholic Church that has been established in Uganda for years, but he instead decided to join Cardonia's church. Then we have Dominic, who was somebody who was pretty high up in the Catholic Church, who, again, a man with a bruised ego who is easily manipulated. Essentially, he wanted to be the vicar general in the real established Catholic Church, but could never hope to get that position. Cardonia spotted that and brought him over and made him the vicar general of her church. All of these things and all of this, I say all this to say Cardonia can spot what you want out of life, can spot your weaknesses, manipulate you, give you what you want, while also using you as a tool for what she wants to do. The last part of the recap that I think is really important to say is the fact that Uganda was going through a very volatile time as a country. So Uganda got its independence in 1962, then a dictatorship took hold, and then when around the time this church came into fruition in 1989, for the first time, Uganda was basically going into all-out civil war. So everybody was trying to find some stability. Everyone was trying to find some hope and some peace and all of that. So Cardonia, like I said in part one, spotted how she could use the volatile nature politically of what was going on in Uganda in order to manipulate more people and legitimize herself, but also manipulate more people into joining her religion. You know what I mean? So she used the backdrop of the chaos of what Uganda was going through historically, politically, civil war-y, and used that to push more people through fear into her church. She'd say things like, you see, the real Catholic Church is corrupt because all of this is happening. All of this is happening because the end of the world is happening, and I'm the right church. I'm the right version of the Catholic Church. If you join me, you will be saved. You will be spared when the end of the world happens. So I say all that to say all of this added up creates this kind of stew of a situation that ends up boiling over about 10 years after the whole thing started. So that is just a quick recap of what happened in part one. If you want more detail of the story part of it, go to part one. That'll be linked in the bio, or in the description rather. But without further ado, let's get into the tea. So in part one, I basically let it be known, and on TikTok, that Cardonia could go into a single community and convert the entire community. And that was one part, her skill of manipulation, oration, and lying to people, selling them a dream and all of that. But in second part, it was how Ugandan communities were set up and how it led to a domino effect, especially considering what was going on at the time. So, in communities in Uganda, it's like a chain. Everyone's connected. It's collective. So if one person in a community is doing something, it's not long before their family members start doing it. Then the family itself does it. Then the people around that family, and so on and so forth. So Cordonia knew that, and she knew in order to be able to convert a big amount of people at a time into the cult, her religion, she knew that she'd have to target certain people in the community that people would follow. So she'd go into a town, they'd hand out, pamphlets, they'd say their piece to the people, they'd talk to the people and start basically doing, quote unquote, a version of missionary work. Then, say your brother starts going to the church services and you notice a change in him and you notice different things and you're getting curious as to, what these church services are like because it seems like your brother is happier. So he, over time, starts talking to you about what he's been doing at the church. He convinces you guys to go and try it out. You try it out. Then you go and you convince your, maybe less immediate family to go. Then eventually they convince their families to go, then they convince their families to go, and it just becomes this domino effect of the amount of people that end up being converted at a time. So Cordonia had a skill for spotting who was the right people to do this, but this started to become kind of this self-sustaining system, positive feedback loop of just never-ending converts at a point at their height, because she knew how Ugandan communities worked and she knew who to pick, and boom, you have a whole marketing system, a marketing team after a while of people just coming in. So again, she was a brilliant woman. She knew what to do. She knew how to tap into the shit, for real. So then after, they'd convert communities, Cordonia wanted to market more widely. So she started to get people in the newspapers to write things about the church. And then she got into television and broadcasting in order to cast a wider net to as many people in Uganda as possible in order to have them convert to their church. So it was a steady kind of building up of a snowball, like a snowball effect of how she marketed this. And, it's kind of easy now to see, with the context of what was going on in Uganda at the time, why people were so readily available and ripe for the picking for Cordonia to get them to convert to her thing. So like I said in part one, specifics and record keeping are very scarce because of what was going on with the Civil War, but also the fact that a lot of higher government officials were either getting bribed or were somehow in bed with this cult. So there aren't a lot of records. But it's clear that in 1993, this cult was starting to get into its peak. There was a huge congregation, very sizable, and Ugandan authorities decided to award the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments and award it the status of being a non-governmental entity. So that means that they can now go into different communities because they now have a legal legitimacy to them and set up posts to be able to start converting in places where maybe they couldn't before they had the legal ability to. So again, like I said, the government is legitimizing this, and Cordonia is feeding into what's going on, and she understands that the best pull to get more people into this congregation is to lead with fear, to lead with shame, and to lead with fear. So she started comparing herself to the legitimate Catholic Church in the community. Look how corrupt they are. Look at what they're doing. This is because they're doing this is why we're here as a country. If you want to truly be saved from what's going on here, you convert to us. We are the group that is righteous. We are the group that knows better. We will get you salvation. And that's what she started preaching. And people were desperate. I keep saying this, but I cannot hammer it home enough that people were desperate. It's a timing issue of when this cult happened, as well as the manipulation skills of Cordonia to recognize how to properly get people indoctrinated into her cult. But she started using shame. She started comparing herself to the real Catholic Church, and it just took off. It took off. Her missionaries had a reputation of being completely ruthless. They would hound you. They would bother you. They would make sure you knew they existed. They would make sure you were there. They would try their hardest to get you to convert. On top of that, if you were someone who decided to defect from the cult, then they would have your family members who are still in the cult talk to you, try and convince you to come in. And if that didn't work, they would surround your house and tell you could no longer come into your own home, that they would, protest outside of their house, keep people from going into their own homes at this point. So if you were a defector, you'd lose your complete family, and then you would lose your physical property on top of that. So most people would end up coming back into the cloth because you lost your home and your family. What are you going to do now? So she was her missionaries were known to be extremely, extremely relentless in that way. And that's how they got all their converts, and that's how all these converts decided to stay. Now, another massive push in the success of the cult in terms of people converting was the start of the AIDS epidemic in Uganda. AIDS was not even starting, but beginning to really become an issue in Africa at this time. But it was really starting to take hold in Uganda in a way that nobody had ever seen. So not only are these people living through unprecedented political times with a civil war, but also there is an illness that nobody really knows anything about that is decimating entire families, entire communities. People are getting sick in ways that they haven't even heard of. So Credonia, of course, sees this as another fucking opportunity. She sees it as, I can use the AIDS epidemic to show that God is unhappy with these people. And what I can do is I can let all the people in the community prey on their fears of getting AIDS, getting sick, and passing away by saying all the people that get sick and die from this disease are going against God and he's punishing them. So kind of like what the United States government did to gay people with the AIDS epidemic, if we're being real. But she used that in a more forceful sense in order to get more people to convert. She'd be able to point and be like, see, look, that person's sick. God is not favoring them, and I'm healthy. And so everyone in our community is healthy. So if you want to save yourself from getting AIDS, you need to convert to my religion. And that worked as well. So you got the Civil War working, you got her manipulation skills, you got how the communities are set up in Uganda, and you have the AIDS epidemic at this time that is more legitimizing her statements more and more that the end is near, that God is, smiting thee who go against him and things like that. Like, it really felt like the end of times, and she knew that and she used that. So how it would work. So Credonia would come to your community. She'd sell the hell out of this cult to you. You and your family convert. You are completely required to give up all of your personal assets now to the church. So the church was, as they were acquiring converts, they're acquiring houses, they're acquiring real estate, they're acquiring land. And so everyone who wants to join this church has to give up everything in order to join it, to show your faith in the movement. So basically, everyone would convert and give up their land, and then a compound would be formed, right? And so they'd have places where you have meetings, places where you pray, and they'd create the compound. So everyone lived, worked, prayed, slept, ate, shat, all in this same area, all in this closed compound area of the land that they acquired through getting converts. And they had many of these little satellite kind of places that different people were in charge of leading. So, for example, Credonia and Joseph may travel amongst them, but Dominic, the vicar general, may have his own compound that he's in charge of. And maybe Scholastica and her husband have their own compound. But they're doing this in order to have as many hands and as many pots as they could to get as many people to convert and get as much land, as much money. They are signing over their life away, basically, to the church at this point. And it's understandable. Like I said, breaking down what was going on in the background, people were scared and they thought this was the answer. And Credonia sold it. She sold it. And this is a classic cult tactic. Like when you sign up for the Sea Org in Scientology or what have you, giving up everything, selling your life to the cult. This happened with the people in Jonestown. This happened with a bunch of different cults where you give up your old life, you give up everything, and you sign it over to the church. So the church is acquiring wealth, obviously. But you are now a one-note individual. You work for the church, you eat the way the church wants you to eat, you speak the way the church wants you to speak, you wear what the church wants you to wear, you sleep when the church tells you to sleep, and it starts to create this closed community where everyone thinks the same way, everyone does the same thing at certain times, and you are in full control of the cult, which, like I said earlier, lends itself to keeping people in its clutches, because if you decide to leave, you have nothing. You have nothing to go back to. Your whole family can no longer speak to you. If you really, really want to start over, it takes a lot. So a lot of people ended up just staying or coming back because this is now your life. Your life is just the cult above all else. That's your one priority. And it's just such a classic cult move. When you look at cults that end badly, people feel helpless. So at a point, if you're doubting it individually, if you're starting to have doubts, you can have the doubts, but what are you going to do about it? You've given up friends, you've given up family, you've given up your assets, your retirement, your land, your house. Like going back and looking at that and saying this was all for nothing, it oftentimes makes people double, triple, quadruple down on the belief instead of understanding, child, this isn't good. If they're asking you to do this, this is not a place that you want to be, because you should always be able to leave and go as you please. But they're forcing your hand by manipulating you, by taking control of your entire life. So that's the way of entry if you are somebody who's middle class or upper class and you had land to give and money to give. If you are someone who is poor, in exchange for the church protecting you from the sins of the world, you would have to write down all of your sins. And as a collective of people who were poor, you would all have to pay in a certain fine collectively, and then a group of poor people would be let in. But if you had nothing to give, you had to expose yourself in order to be able to be protected by the church. And of course, as with all of these things, none of the leaders followed the rules. Of course not. All these people were living very, very modestly. And Cordonia, Joseph, all these people are living lavish with all the money they're getting from these people in order to get them to convert. So it's that thing of, which is a telltale sign of a cult, where the leader can never be wrong. Whatever the leader decides to do, whatever the leaders decide to do, is automatically correct because they're the leader and nothing else. It can be hypocritical. It could go against their own teachings. It could be downright parasitic. But it doesn't matter because they are up here and you are down here. So the act of even questioning the fact that they get to do certain things is a show of disloyalty and disrespect, and you will be dealt with. It's sick. And it's sad because, like I said, like for a lot of these people, this isn't something where, you're online and you get, dragged into a deep hole on spirituality or religion or something like that. That isn't that. This is where people are having real dangers. They're really scared for their lives. Between the AIDS outbreaks and the Civil War, this place is offering them something that no other place in Uganda can now offer, which is a safe haven, food, shelter, and safety from both of these things. They're trying to guarantee that. So for a lot of people, it was the circumstances that pushed them into making a rash decision that ended up ruining their lives. It wasn't them alone deciding to choose, having agency to choose, or even being in a place of their own that was, oh, I'm in a transitional period in my life, I don't have friends or whatever, and them preying on that. It was purely, for a lot of it, pushed by the outside world, what was going on politically, and the fact that there is an epidemic, which is so sad. They were being sold a dream of safety, and they end up dying at the hands of this cult. So sad. So like I said, and is often with a lot of these cults, is they predict, they say that they know when the world is going to end. So like I said, that was part of her pitch. That's part of her pitch to these people. I know that the world is about to end because the Marian apparition told me that, and look around you at the craziness and the chaos. So Credonia basically kept preaching that we're at the end of times, and this is what's going to happen. You know, Russia's going to have to deal with this, and Japan's going to have to be, they're going to be flooded. And all of these things I'm hearing directly from my Marian apparitions and my connection with the Lord, but you're with me, so you guys will be fine. And the goal was to basically not necessarily, even though outwardly was to convert as many people as possible, but the truth was you didn't need that many people to convert in order to keep the spirit of the religion alive. So by the end of it, by the peak of this movement, there are about 3,000 converts, which is a lot for a ground up religion to be able to convince 3,000 people of this. But also in the grand schemes of other religions, it's not that much. So basically what Credonia would preach, like I said, these are all doomsday, end of the world types of cults. Like cults in general usually skew to this place. So what she said was, the world is going to end somewhere before the year 2000. And she makes many predictions which will cause problems down the line. But the time period before the world ends is called Civ. And that's the time period that they were in before the world is ending, but close to it. And like she said, you know, sometime, you know, it's never really on the nose at first. Sometime before the year 2000, the world was going to end. Mind you, the superstition, the fear, all of that around the year 2000, like I said in part 1, wasn't just Credonia's cult feeling this. It was everybody on the planet. Y2K fashion is called Y2K fashion because Y2K was a movement where people actually thought that all the computers were going to take over the world or not take over the world was going to collapse, and shit was going to go bonkers. All because of the year 2000 looming. So this was a generalized global sentiment that a lot of people were feeling that, again, Credonia tapped into 10 years in advance and knew, built up a community to have them fear the year 2000 and being able to point out all the stuff around them in order to push for more converts to be on her side, because hurry, you have to convert to me in order to get right with the Lord before the world ends in 2000. Ciao. But like I was saying, lots of cults use this end of the world tactic, end of the world is near, to pressure people to convert. But that's always the famous last words, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, no one knows for sure. No one can predict it. And what ends up always fucking happening is they are pushed into coming up with an exact date of when the world ends. That date comes and goes, and it starts to show the people, maybe you don't really know what you're talking about. I'm starting to question everything she told me, because she said without a doubt that this date was going to be the end of the world. And it's been 3 weeks since that date and I'm still here. And then she said she's moving the date to a different time. So does she actually know? I gave over my house for this. I gave them all my assets for this. And it starts to add this frantic nature because they put it on a date that they can't obviously predict, which causes the level that everyone's interacting with each other to rise, because now everyone has anxiety about what they gave up to be a part of this cult. You know what I mean? So how the end of the world So how the end of the world situation was supposed to go is God sends down the plagues in order to, kill off as many people as possible. And then there would be 3 days of darkness. The compounds would turn into fortified arks with food, shelter, and water to sustain the believers during the end of times, and they'd float away like Noah on an ark. So part of the work that these people would be doing in this compound is physically building an ark, so that when the end of times does come and the 3 days of darkness does happen, they can be in their ark while all of this is going on and float away to safety. Honey, so basically, if you were a new convert, you'd have to read Cardonia's Bible, A Timely Message from Heaven, I believe is what it's called. Then, after that, you'd have to go and hear Joseph K's visions. And his visions would basically be more of the day-to-day life, like what you eat, how much time you spend sleeping, all of that kind of thing. So this is what the new converts learned about what their days or what their weeks were spent like. So, according to Big Joseph, 4/7 of the day should be spent in prayer, period. 2/7 of the day was to work. 1/7 of the day was allocated to rest. Mind you, in the compound, here's the culture of the compound, okay? You'd come, you'd learn first Cardonia's word, then you'd learn the day-to-day tasks from Joseph's word. Then you'd be thrust out to start either learning how the compound works and knowing your position. Throughout this, these people were not allowed to eat food. They were constantly in a state of fasting. Constantly. So as to show their, humbleness to the Lord. So they're constantly fasting and basically could only eat about 1 to 2 days a week. Solid food. Then, on top of that, you couldn't speak to people on the compound. You couldn't talk to people. So a lot of people ended up writing notes to each other or learning sign language, but you were not allowed to speak out loud at all. So we have a bunch of sleep-deprived, hungry, silent people walking around and working themselves to the bone in order to show their dedication to this cult. The only time you could speak out loud was when there was a town meeting and you were voicing an opinion, if you even could do that. But again, all of these things are classic cult tactics, classic breaking down a human psyche tactics. You are removing the ability for them to control how they rest, what they eat, all of that stuff when they eat. They are starving, they are sleep deprived, they are overworked, and now you're training them to not even be able to literally use their own voice. And especially not use their own voice to advocate for themselves. Honey, the stranglehold. So, basically, each compound in and of itself was self-sustaining, so they grew their own food, all of that, cooked all the meals on site, stuff like that, completely self-sustaining. So if you're able-bodied, you're completely worked to the bone. And of course, you're not getting money for this work. It's your duty. Then on top of that, the children were forced to be in schools day in or day out, learning about the lore of the movement of the restoration of the 10 Commandments. So they were forced to be in school all of the fucking time. Then, on top of that, they were stripped of their individual names. So all the women were called sisters, all the boys were called brothers, and if you were married, I believe you were called auntie and uncle. Let me double check. Yes. All married people were called aunts and uncles. Civil marriages weren't necessarily noted or really kept up in the reality. Men and women were pretty much separated throughout this whole thing. So your individual identity that you came into the church with no longer mattered. It was all about the collective now, babe. We are sisters. We are brothers. You are auntie. You are uncle. We are one family working hard for salvation. Yep. Classic cult. Classical. The first time Credonia said the world was ending was in 1993. Mind you, 93 to 95 is the peak of the cult. So she basically gave a date in 1993, and as this date got closer and closer, people started to get more and more antsy. And of course, Credonia herself knew she couldn't guarantee that the world was going to end on this day. So she sent out an order to all the leaders of all the different compounds that if people start to get out of line, you can use deadly force on them, and God would think it's okay because you were doing his bidding. So this is something that was spread to all the leaders of the different satellite compounds from early on as the peak happened. So of course that day came and went. And, people started to question, but strangely enough, people were like, she was able to bounce back from that. Not a lot of people left. In fact, barely anyone left after that. So people were like, okay, she got a new date. Ciao. So remember when I was saying that there's not a lot of records of a lot of things because there are people in governmental parties that were involved in this cult happening? So we're circling back to that fact. So Dominic, the vicar general, think of him as like the spokesperson. He would be like the PR agent making stuff happen. So he would be the one winning favor with the political officials, bringing them money, bringing them offerings, donating to whatever campaign by way of the church. You know what I mean? And so he would spend his time doing a lot of that. There was a point, I believe it was in 1993 or 1994, where the Pope came to Uganda, and Dominic was able to talk to the Pope a little bit about what the cult was doing, and the Pope blessed the cult. Or, he didn't say it was a cult, but blessed them. And of course, what people understand about the Pope is trotted all around the world to bless different stuff. To bless children, to bless spaces, to bless people, to bless stuff. That is what the Pope does, all around. So, in retrospect, a Pope blessing you can be a big deal to some, but for someone like me who isn't Catholic and knows that this is part of the Pope's job, doesn't mean that much. Do you know how much this meant to the people of the restoration of the Ten Commandments? The Pope blessing their movement? Baby, it meant everything. And it raised Dominic, Vicar General's stock because he was able to bring that back to the people, which provided Credonia with more material to manipulate everyone else with. And he was proving to be a very valuable asset. He was understanding the assignment of his position. So, like I said, Dominic was the person in charge of getting all these people to, all the political people and all these people greasing their hands so that they are basically left alone and can be self-governing and autonomous from any kind of political interference. So like I said, in 92-93 was the first date that Credonia said. It went and gone. People were still antsy, but questioning, but not too much. So the second date was slated for 1995. And she made up some kind of excuse about, well, you can't control what the Lord tells you, and if the Lord changes his mind, he changes his mind or whatever. And people were accepting of that at that point. So 1995 is now the new time, the new date that the world is supposed to end, right? That date came and went. And again, now people are kind of like, okay, 2 for 2, Credonia. You claim to be the leader. You claim to have a direct communication with God himself, and you are hearing these dates and nothing's happening. So people again are getting more and more antsy. Again, 95 was the peak. So people started to fall off and get less and less, excited about the cult and left and all of that. They started to decline. But when that date came and went in 95, Credonia said that the world was going to end on December 31st, 1999, right before the year 2000. Now, a lot of people were kind of annoyed by that because Civ, remember the time period before the world ends, was, like I said, purposely made vague. So Credonia said Civ is going to end any time before the year 2000 starts, right? So it could be December 31st, 1999, right before the clock strikes midnight. It could be 92, 93, 95. So she was able to kind of dance around the fact that she made things vague to start and was able to say, actually, I was wrong. Actually, I was wrong multiple times, and had these people brainwashed enough that they still continue to believe her. But after she said December 31st, 1999, a lot of people were like, that's really at the cutoff point. That's not what I thought would be the end of the world. That's not when I thought the end of the world would happen. So more people started falling off, and there's more rumblings of people not really starting to question Cardonia's credibility, which was not good. Mind you, like I said, she had already told all of these satellite compounds, hey, you can kill people if they get too rowdy. So people are starting to get rowdy now after the third date. This is the beginning of the end. So Big Joseph K's family stages basically a rebellion against him and take over some of his land. Then lots of people start to leave, and they make a choice to consolidate a lot of the compounds. So those satellite compounds started to get consolidated to some of the bigger compounds. So those people were moved around southern Uganda to different compounds to consolidate the land, and then they were going to sell off that land in order to get as much profit as they could from that land before Joseph's family could sell the land. So things were not looking good. Things were looking kind of like, okay, you're 2 for 2, Credonia, in terms of predicting the end of the world, and people are starting to question, and people are starting to leave, and now Big Joseph, your family is trying to sell off the land. They're rebelling against you. You're consolidating. It looks like you're shrinking as a congregation, and so this is the beginning of the end. So things were starting to get pretty hostile as the end of time's date grew near. People were demanding questions in the town halls. They were very volatile, very heated. And so they started to tighten their grip on the congregation because people were really starting to rebel. So basically, if you were seen to be somebody who shook things up, if you're somebody who was asking too many questions about the land, about what was going on with the money, about when the end of the world was, and details about that, if you were too vocal, you would be quickly silenced. And silence meaning you would disappear. And if anyone ever asked where you were, the leaders would say the Virgin Mary decided to take them to heaven. So this is, obviously starting to get violent, starting to get murderous, and it's starting to get extremely sketchy. It's getting to a place where people are being murdered for speaking out, and this is the beginning, not even the beginning. This is the muck of the end, and we're not even to the end. Ciao. And you have to see how all of this works together, because back in 93, Cardonia gave these different compound leaders the ability to kill without consequence. And now in 99, close to 99, we are having people straight up disappearing because of their questioning. She's thinking 40 steps ahead, but a lot of people are really starting to look around and say, what did I get myself into? I sold all my money. I gave my money. I gave my house. I gave my land for this. My entire family's here. How are we even supposed to get out? If we got out, how would we even survive knowing the world is the way it is now? And on top of that, if I question or ask the wrong question to the wrong person, I could be the Virgin Mary's next target to take to heaven. Like, no, it's getting bonkers. Okay, so essentially, in 1989, due to many complaints about abuses in their schools, on their compounds, the government did step in and find that kids were being abused and shut it down. So a lot of kids, before anything could happen, they moved quickly, took all the kids out of school and moved them to the, consolidated compounds around, okay? So that happens in 98. Also in 98, Big Joseph is diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder. He's diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder. He's taken to the hospital, and basically he walks himself out, doesn't believe it, but after that point, he's rarely seen off of the compound. So everyone's kind of delving into a more chaotic, more mentally unstable state, okay? Then 1999 comes. December 31st, 1999 comes. And guess what it does? It goes. And we're in the new millennium. It is now 2000 and nothing fucking happened. So now Credonia is 3 for 3 and the pressure's getting worser, if you know what I mean. TikTok people, you know what I mean. So now it's the year 2000. Now it's a new millennia and the world didn't end on New Year's. So now everyone's like, okay, where am I? What did I do? And they start questioning, getting more and more antsy. So everything was getting more and more restless. People were getting violent. There were threats being made towards Credonia and the leadership and the clergy. So Credonia had to think fast of how to get herself out of this mess of a situation she put herself into. Because she made these people give up their family, give up their lives, give up their money, give up their land, give up everything. And now she was 3 for 3 for predicting the end of the world and fucking failing. So now she starts getting creative. And like I said, BPD disorder and sociopathic tendencies. So you know this solution to get herself out of this situation isn't going to be a good one. Isn't going to end with everyone getting rainbows and stuffed animals and walking into a meadow into happiness. No, you know it's going to be some bullshit. And it was. So basically what Credonia did was she got all her security force and basically said, you need to bring back defectors. I don't care how you bring them back. We're going to get the government officials that we've been bribing and we're going to lift the spirits by throwing a celebration. So these security forces went out into the community, lied to people's family members and said, oh, your family member is very sick. You need to come. Straight up kidnap people. Manipulate people, bribe people, all sorts of things, all these people to bring them back to celebrate with the cult about, I don't know what they're celebrating, which is a big red flag, but to celebrate with the cult in a collective sense. And, people are being brought back over time. And then when Credonia was satisfied with the amount of people that were able to come and celebrate, March 17th, 2000 happens. Ciao. The day that will live in infamy, child. So, as you might have guessed, March 17th, 2000 was the day of the celebration that Credonia decided to put on for all these people, government officials, family members that defected, people currently in the cult. Okay? So basically how the party went, what is, again, not a lot of records, but what is speculated to have happened is on March 17th, 2000, Credonia basically made the announcement that Civ, remember the time before the end of the world, was about to end. So the end of the world was coming very soon, and that everyone needed to celebrate, and they were going to celebrate with a party in the arcs that they built. Wooden boats, big boats to fit a lot of people. They built these arcs, so everyone was partying in the arcs. All these people they invited, they had, sodas, they had actual food, and people were enjoying their time. But then people noticed that the doors in these arcs were locked. And, people were yelling and asking questions and all that sort of thing. And basically they were reassured that, this is for their own safety. We're keeping them here because the end of the world is happening. And, keep celebrating, child. So what do you think happened? All these people are in these arcs. The arcs are then doused in gasoline and set ablaze. Mind you, they're locked in. So when all is said and done, over 500 people died in these arcs in this way. Over 500 people were burned to death in this way because of, this cult. They died. They perished. But this is where things get crazy. And yeah, this is where things get crazier because that number is not where it ends. All right. Also, I just want to warn you that the next part where we talk about what was found out through the investigation was a complete mess. Like I said, Records were burned. Government officials did not want to have any piece of this. So there's lots of stonewalling and lots of not taking this investigation seriously. So the people who were hired to investigate what happened didn't get a lot, period. So like I said, the 500 people in their arcs that were burned alive was only the beginning. Because as they investigated these different compounds, they started to find some extremely disturbing things. So this is what they found. I have to read it off my script, so forgive me, okay? So at one of the compounds where Dominic was a leader, Dominic noticed that fresh concrete was poured in a strange place that never had concrete before. They dug it out in the investigation, and they found an additional 155 bodies. So now the death toll is 500 plus 155, so 655 bodies now. And then, here we go. What else was found? Spread over the rest of the compounds were similar mass graves, like this one, adding another 400 victims to the list. So, there was 500 people that were burned to death. Then, at different compounds, were mass graves. Mind you, remember, since 1993, Credonia said you can off people if they disagree with you, and God would look favorably on it. You are doing God's work. You are doing God's bidding. So, a lot of these mass graves had bodies in varying stages of decomp. Some bodies were super new, some were older, some were fully decomposed. But what you were finding was the 500 people burned. Then there were just all of these mass graves all over these compounds. So the final total was, ring, 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 ding, 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 1,055 people passed and perished because of this cult. 1,055. 1,055. Ciao. And all died in varying ways. Some of the bodies in the mass graves were burned. Some of them had been strangled. Some of them had been beaten over the head with rocks. So it varied. But it was clear that murdering people was normalized in this closed group, in this community. And it was just an incredibly brutal community, period. And people had been dying for a long time. After they found, mind you, I think a part that I forgot is Credonia and the leadership were never found again. Were never heard from again, except for Dominic. Never seen, heard from again. People say they have sightings of Credonia and the crew, and have over the course of, since this happened in 2000, but those sightings have never been confirmed. A lot of the blame was shifted on Credonia, as I think properly so, but all of them participated in the leadership of this cult and accepted this as a reality that led to over 1,000 people being murdered. On top of that, like I said, that's where the story ends, basically. No justice has been served for this situation. No one, they just shrug their shoulders because obviously they blame Credonia, but they can't get eyes on her. They can't bring her and arrest her because she's effectively disappeared. So because higher-ups in the government kind of blocked and created red tape to figure out the truth of the investigation, this is basically where the story ends, y'all. People died, and no justice. Over 1,000 people were murdered, and no justice has been found. And these people are still presumably out and about, living their lives as different people. They were never seen or heard from again, and their bodies were never recovered from any of these places. So they were alive. Ciao. So some people, there's a sighting, I think, closer to when the event happened in 2000 of all four of them riding in a truck away from the scene. So I don't know the truth. Upon further investigation, they found other bodies that were not determined to be any of the leadership. So again, they kind of disappeared into the night, but that's where the story ends. No justice. 1,055 people murdered brutally, violently. And yeah, that is the fiery end of how the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult ended abruptly in March 17th of the year 2000. And this story is something that just brought, like, had my jaw dropped. Everyone knows about Jonestown. Everyone knows about Heaven's Gate. Everyone knows about these cults that go bad that are common knowledge. But this cult, this story, the fact that more people died than in Jonestown, I mean, there's a million and one things you can take from this story. Cardoni is a mastermind, and she was a master manipulator. And people lost their lives, man. People lost their lives. So, yeah. I hope you enjoyed this story. I hope you've never heard of it before, and I was, letting y'all into some tea that you didn't know about. I hope you continue to watch my true crime videos. Thank you for watching. More to come. Watch the ads. If you haven't subscribed yet, press that subscribe button, press that notification bell, press it, press it, press it. Comment your thoughts down below. Remember, the pinned comment is Jonathan Brandenburg's Venmo, so if you feel generous, send him something. That would be really great of you. But what else? Other than that, I guess all I have to say is Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards. Love y'all.